It's really interesting to me how criticism is really associated with antagonism and an antagonistic relationship. People say like, why do you have to be so critical? Uh, sometimes directors, producers of movies, they have that relationship with critics. It's like, why do you even have to talk about it? Why do you have to be like this? Why do you have to apply your critical attitude to what we created? What A.O. Scott does by bringing in the Ratatouille reference and Ratatouille description is he casts that relationship in terms of an alliance, in terms of an alliance instead of antagonism. So he writes here one of the passages that I really liked, describing Remy and Ego. Remy and Ego both devote themselves for reasons neither one entirely understands. So this is also interesting that neither one entirely is fully conscious. Why? So neither one entirely understands, but in ways that seem innate and involuntary, to the especially intense appreciation of something everyone else either takes for granted or enjoys in a casual, undisciplined way. Later, he writes, Ego and Remy are united in a project that the rest of the world can only dimly comprehend, but that is nonetheless vital to the world's progress. Remy may think that pleasing Ego will help him realize his professional ambitions, but what he requires more deeply is the recognition of a like-minded soul. That is precisely what Ego needs from Remy. His love of food has been so frequently and thoroughly disappointed that it has nearly withered into cynicism. This is the moral danger, a danger to morale and to decency. So I want to go back to that first line that I highlighted, and I want to hear your feedback to this too, if this also stands out to you. The foundational act of criticism, the selection of an object, and if we keep with that alliance, the theme of alliance, selecting an object is not just an act of taking attention from one place to another place, like moving attention in space from object to object. It's also an act of awakening. You awaken to the object in front of you. And that awakening has in it, is intrinsic to that sense of awakening, that experience of awakening is the feeling that you want to share that. And it's a kind of passion that awakens that wants to communicate itself to other people. So uh, I'm moving against that sentiment that a critic wants to give some moral lesson or give a lesson in taste to the unknowing public, that wants to teach them how to appreciate art, what good art is. I don't think it is like that. I don't think it is uh, moralistic or moralizing in that way. It is instead that relatively more innocent feeling that this is really worth paying attention to as an object for our attention. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why it is worth attending to, what we can find in it. So alliance, awakening, and the things that come after that. Uh, I see that as a feature of some experiences that invite us to talk about them more than others. And in fact, Scott talks about in that last chapter that one of the worst things you can say to something is to say it is beneath criticism, that it can't even be a target of what this good thing that we do. We can't include that in the set of things that could be discussed. But if I mean, I work on the assumption that there are certain things that invite us to to talk, and to me, that suggests again another way in which art is different from life or experience, the raw experience, is that when we do stuff, when we go out there and add to our catalog of experiences, we add to the length of our life. But criticism and art are about depth. And there are certain experiences that they invite us to care about their depth. They invite us to pay attention to their depth, to see them as having depth. I see art in that sense, in that way, and I see some other experiences like to me, trauma has that quality. That's why people who don't relate to our traumas they say, "Why, just get over it. Just don't think about it. Don't fixate on your past." They don't get this fact that if you love a work of art or if you have had a traumatic experience, you want to uh, you want to pay sufficient attention to the depth of that experience to really come to terms with it, to understand it, to discuss it, to see and find different ways of looking at it. Then you can move on. You can't just move on. There's no such a thing as just moving on. And I think I mean, I'm not saying that trauma and art are the same, but there's a feature in them having to do with not fitting the background of whatever else is going on, the backdrop of them as experiences that stand out and don't really easily fit, and that they invite inspection because they have that depth. Yeah, I also like Han's attention to. I mean, this is what Han talks about in The Scent of Time too, which is a precursor to the Crisis of Narration. I haven't read the Crisis of Narration, but in The Scent of Time, he says that uh, our problem with denarrativization, how we have lost the capacity to tell and understand things in terms of stories, is the fact that we have lost the value of our experiences. That any given experience, like an experience of watching a movie, because there's so many movies to watch, watching any movie doesn't have as much value anymore. So what you're doing with your friend Chris is you're going against that current. You're watching fewer things and you're making sure you're getting enough depth in them from each one of them. You're like tapping into getting more from their potential. And by doing that, recognizing more value in the experience that others might not. My final comments. I inspired by Mike, Chris, and I'll get to related to Patrick and Tyson as well. Uh, Criticism absolutely gives us resources to hold on to things. Uh, Learning about criticism isn't just it isn't just going to help us remember better, but even as Chris, I think you said that, be present to them when we are in their presence. And those resources are conceptual, like the distinction between form and content, like the distinction between close up and medium shot, long shot, or the camera angle, being aware of those conceptually. And the art of remembering is closely tied, I think, to the art of criticism. The art of knowing what's worth remembering. I think that's part of criticism too. Knowing what's worth remembering, not just for me, but for the collective. And that's where, tying to what Patrick said, it gets to power. I have power over our collective memory, our collective remembering, and saying that this is not worth remembering. So let's forget this. Nobody needs to feel they are missing out on this book or that movie. The Killer, for example. um, yeah, but I think if it just becomes about power, it's similar to how it can become just about money. It should be about power. It should be about recognition of money and power, those things, but not if it becomes only those things, it falls into cynicism. And that was where we find Ego in Ratatouille before his encounter with Remy. He was cynical because his life is just about the exercise of his power as a famous established critic. But it doesn't have to be limited to that. And when it's not limited to that, then it's when the critic loses power, feels the joy of being powerless in the presence of a work of art. Once again, they remember what it feels like to be a wide-eyed audience member, feeling the joy or feeling wonder for the first time, or in a way that's fresh. I'll stop there. Any